Ever Maha Accordion. Hello, I'm Jerry O'Neill and I invite you to join me on the fourth leg of a global mystery tour, in which we will explore the worldwide influence of Ireland's musical and literary heritage, concentrating mostly on Ireland's forgotten bard, Thomas Moore. We will meet some remarkable characters and hear the fascinating and sometimes incredible stories associated with his poems and ballads. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. If you look at a map of the United States, you will notice that many of the cities and place names in the center of the continent, from the Canadian border right down to the Gulf of Mexico, are French. Detroit, Eau Claire, Illinois, St. Louis, Baton Rouge, New Orleans, and many more. The reason, of course, is that this territory was initially explored by French or French Canadians. They subsequently set up trading posts, some of which have become the great metropolises of today. Here is a slide of North America in the middle of the 18th century. Most of the territory at that stage was claimed by France or Spain. Of course, most of the inland territories were still inhabited by Native Americans. European settlement was still largely confined to the coastal areas. The men who explored and subsequently traded along those routes for 200 years were known as les voyageurs, the voyagers. They built up a romantic reputation as tough, rugged, adventurous, hard-living and hard-drinking men. The fame of the voyageurs was spread to the wider world outside the Francophone zone by one poem and song by Thomas Moore. The means of transport employed by the voyageurs was the birch bark canoe, based on a Native American prototype. Those canoes were a sophisticated showcase of the woodwork and boat-building crafts. The traders paddled up the St. Lawrence River, then up the Ottawa, over a short land bridge to the Great Lakes, down Lake Michigan, and then over another short land bridge through a series of tributaries, which finally fed into the mighty Mississippi. The city of Chicago is actually built on this last important traditional crossing point. We'll have a look at a few very lifelike paintings of the voyageurs in their canoes. These are not just romantic recreated scenes. They were painted by an artist who had travelled with the voyageurs in the mid-19th century, shortly before their way of life surrendered to the modern world. And the painter was this remarkable English woman, Frances Anne Hopkins. Moore travelled by boat from Niagara down the St. Lawrence to Halifax, a journey which took 4 days. On the way, he was entertained by the boatmen singing voyageur songs. The voyageurs had gained a reputation as exceptionally good singers. Spending more than 12 hours paddling each day, they sang along in time with the paddles, and having plenty of time for practice, they became quite proficient. Moore spent some time near Montreal, and this is where he was a guest. This is a vintage postcard from the first half of the last century, when the building was a bank branch, and when Moore's memory was still very much alive in the area. The information on it is somewhat inaccurate. Moore never lived there as such. The house still stands and is now a listed building. While there, he was moved to write his famous poem, A Canadian Boat Song. And here is the first stanza. Faintly as tolls the evening chime, our voices keep tune and our oars keep time. Soon as the woods on the shore look dim, we'll sing at St. Anne's our parting hymn. Row, brothers, row, the stream runs fast, the rapids are near, and the daylight past. The St. Anne's referred to is the ancestor of this church, St. Anne de Bellevue, which lies at the western corner of Montreal Island, near a rapids where the Ottawa River joins the St. Lawrence. It was to these rapids, the Lachine Rapids, that the city of Montreal owes its very existence. For this was the barrier which prevented ocean ships from sailing further upriver. A fur trading post was set up to transfer the valuable beaver pelts which were brought from the interior by canoe into ships for export. The trading post has developed into the second biggest city in Canada and the second largest French-speaking city in the whole world. As we're at St. Anne's, let's take a short musical interval. That Connemara. How's that for Canadian Shannos dancing? The group is Don Messer and his Islanders and is from a popular Canadian TV program from the 60s called Don Messer's Jubilee. Don Messer is credited with popularizing this tune. They are playing St. Anne's Reel, a very popular tune in Irish traditional music. However, it seems it only arrived on the Shamrock shore relatively recently. It's believed to originate in Canada, possibly Quebec, because the first recording is by a famous Quebec fiddler, Willie Ringuette, and the St. Anne in the title may well be the St. Anne de Bellevue. It was from this point just upriver of the rapids that a large fleet of canoes departed on their long, hazardous journey every late spring after the ice had melted. Before leaving, it was the custom for the boatmen to pray at the church of St. Anne de Bellevue for a successful voyage, and that was the background of Moore's poem. A Scotsman joined one of those expeditions just the following year after Moore's visit and left us a detailed record from which a very entertaining documentary was made. Here's a 2-minute clip.
Up the Ottawa, then the Mattawa, down the French and the Vase, across Nipissing, Georgian Bay and Superior to Athabasca, 3,000 miles by water. Such was the route.
C'est l'aviron qui nous mène, c'est l'aviron qui nous mène en haut. Mon révérend de la jolie Rochelle, mon révérend de la jolie Rochelle, j'ai rencontré trois jolies demoiselles. C'est l'aviron qui nous mène, c'est l'aviron qui nous mène en haut.
Montreal Island, May 20th, 1805. It has been a long and hard winter, but it is over now and the voyageurs are assembling at Lachine for the journey into the interior. The departure is as ever an impressive spectacle. From where I sit, I can count full 50 great canoes advancing upon the waters, the voyageurs singing out lustily as they contend for the lead. Before this trip is over, we shall have travelled full 1,800 miles, upriver and down, past many a dangerous rapide.
Et moi choisi, et j'ai mis la plus belle, c'est toi choisi, les écrits à plus belle, la qui montée, dernière fois sur Pastel.
C'est l'aviron qui nous mène, c'est l'aviron qui nous mène en haut, c'est l'aviron qui nous mène, c'est l'aviron qui nous mène en haut.
The song sung so lustily there is called C'est l'Aviron, one of the Voyageurs' more popular ballads. Moore set his poem to music and had it published. It was hugely successful and was his first major hit, to use an anachronism, on both sides of the Atlantic. It set a trend in composition of Canadian boat songs, a new popular genre which continued into the 20th century. The song was sometimes used as Canada's unofficial national anthem in the 19th century. It was often sung at official events along with God Save the Queen, or the King, as the case may be. Tourists were carried out on boats near St. Anne de Bellevue, where they were serenaded with the Canadian boat song in a similar fashion to gondoliers in Venice. However, the days of the voyageurs were numbered. The arrival of the railways and the building of roads seriously impacted on the trade. Just downriver of the rapids, a great bridge carrying the first major Canadian railway was built, the Victoria Bridge. It was the first bridge to cross the mighty St. Lawrence and the longest bridge in the world when it was built. The most famous Irishman in Canadian history and one of the fathers of the Canadian Confederation, Thomas D'Arcy McGee, stated, "Even that miracle of engineering art that spans our great river may crumble and disappear before the Canadian boatman's song shall cease to find an echo in the valley of St. Lawrence." Thomas D'Arcy McGee holds the distinction of being the only senior Canadian politician to have ever been assassinated while in office. He was shot by a disgruntled Fenian. Beside the Victoria Bridge is a sad reminder of our darkest moment in history. The massive 2-ton black rock monument commemorates the deaths of the Irish fleeing the famine who died in the fever sheds nearby of typhus, even though their nationality isn't mentioned specifically. It was raised at the behest of labourers, many of them Irish, engaged in the building of the Victoria Bridge just 10 years after the famine. It is the oldest monument to the Irish famine anywhere. The victims of the famine fevers were looked after selflessly by a local order of sisters, the Grey Nuns. At least 7 of whom died, many more were infected but recovered. John Easton Mills, wealthy banker and mayor of Montreal, volunteered to assist in the sheds. He also contracted typhus and died. Many of the orphaned children were taken in and raised by Montreal families. So we owe a great debt of gratitude to the people of Canada who helped us in our hour of greatest need. The parish of St. Anne de Bellevue is still today a major tourist destination, but Thomas Moore has been demoted to a footnote and is barely mentioned in contemporary tourist brochures, in as far as I could find from internet sources at any rate. Ironically, the major draw is the 19th century canal and locks, nowadays used only by recreational boaters, because it was the building of locks and canals bypassing the rapids and falls and thus allowing the passage of barges and bigger boats, which put a final nail in the coffin of the voyageur's way of life. I've picked a clip of a Dutch choir, the Tourdion Amersfoort, from near Utrecht. It's just amateur footage, not a great quality recording, but they seem to be enjoying themselves, and more importantly, it illustrates the international reach of this Thomas More song to the present day. I like the piano accompaniment. I wonder if this song is in the repertoire of many Irish choirs. So that is my rather long drawn out background to a Thomas More song which made quite an impact in Canada and further afield, but is not widely known in his native land. I have been as careful as possible in researching this presentation, but if there are any errors, please let me know in the comments below. In the next leg of this global mystery tour, we will look at the connection between Thomas More and the emancipation of the slaves in the USA. Good evening, Slán agus Beannacht. I hope you'll join me then.